Hello and welcome to another episode of The Clever Dev. Today what we're going to do is add a clear button to the text field and input, and I have them linked right now. Also add a clear button to the autocomplete and to the select component. Now all of these are very similar. Ultimately they rely on the MUI input component. It's compositional in the text field, autocomplete, and select. And so we're really going back to basics here. Sometimes just getting the basic things is important. Here I have the most basic of text fields and inputs, and we are going to expand these with the ability to clear. And so we'll actually have to give them an icon, and we'll have to pass that through a prop. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to set up state values. So I am simply going to call it value, and I'll say set value, and I'll say use state, and I'll just give it a default value of original value. And interestingly, there is a default prop for the text field, but if you're using state and I say value and I set the value equal to this state prop of value, or whatever I name my state prop, then that will actually essentially act like a default value. So I don't even need the default value prop in here. So kind of a nice little workaround here. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a clear handler. So that's pretty simple. We'll just say const handle clear click, and that's a handler that we will attach to our icon that we're going to pass in via props. And so I'll say just simply set value equal to, we don't need the equal sign there, just an empty string. So this set value here is the set value in our use state. And now what we'll do with this is we need to attach it to an icon. So we really have a functional text field, and in fact, let's take a look at it now. So we've got this original val in here. So everything's as we expect. So let's go back over here. And what we need to do is we need to then add an onChange just to make this text field fully functional, because right now doing any typing or trying to backspace or anything won't actually work because there's no way to change value. Text field's value is set to the state value. If we don't change that somehow, then it's basically a non-functional text field. So let's get that in place, and I will just add that, let's say just right here, new value is the value that's getting passed on change, and I'll just say set value. I'll say new value dot target dot value. Keep it simple. So let's make sure that that's all working just fine. There we go. And I'll refresh this just so that we get back to a clean state. And so really the last thing that we need is we need that icon in here. And we'll do a little bit of styling once we get it in. But for now, let's just add the icon. Let's do it right here. So the text field is, as I mentioned in the intro, it's a compositional component. That means somewhere inside of it, it has multiple MUI components, including an input component. Some others are form control, that's actually what makes the root of the text field, and a label. I think it's the form label component. So what the text field gives us then is it gives us an input prop called input props. What that lets us do is actually feed props directly to the input. So the input itself has an end adornment prop. And there we can see VS Code recognizes that. And so let's pass in a useful value for that. And interestingly, so you can see that it's colon syntax here. And so, this is just a typical prop in a way. You can see that it's the double curly braces because I'm passing an object to input props. That's what input props needs, is an object. So here's our field, here's our value over here, and that explains why we have the colon there. So anyway, what we're going to do is pass in an icon button here. We want a clickable icon. If you want a clickable icon, typically you wrap that in icon button. And you can see up here, I've already imported clear icon. So I'm going to pass that in right here. And we need to attach our clear click handler to our icon button. So I will say on click equals handle clear click. So first things first, let's make sure that's all functional. And there we go, looking good. There we go. Let's go back to our code. So we have functionality. I'm going to show you just a little bit of styling. And one other thing I'll show too is maybe if there's no value in here, like right now, we don't want to see that clear button. Pretty typical behavior. I think the autocomplete works like that as well, just by default. But here, we have to handle that on our own. So I will say sx equals, I will say visibility, and if there's a value, if our state prop is truthy, if it's not an empty string or something like that, or null or undefined or whatever, then we will say that visibility is visible. Otherwise, we'll say hidden. Let's verify that that works. So we already see that it's gone. ABC, it's there. We click it, it clears, and the button just automatically disappears. So all good. Now the last thing for the text field then is that I will add a little bit of styling. So the button, the clear button was gray. Let's give it a little bit of color. So actually before I do that, we need to look at it in the DOM and see what our selector should be. So let's do that here. All right, so we either want to target this button or we want to target the SVG itself. And it might not matter which one we do, but I'm going to target the MUI icon button root. So I will take this class right here. So let's add this as a selector here. This is deep inside our text field. So you always start out with an ampersand, but since we're targeting something deep in our text field, then I'm going to add a space to tell it just normal CSS rules. You're looking for some child element that has class MUI icon button root. And then I will say, whatever our value is. Let's say we're giving it a color of primary main. So that's coming directly from the theme. And I'm going to do just one more thing. I'm going to say when the text field is focused. MUI-focused. So I've clicked in here and it's focused, and I see that focus class here on the, actually it's on the input component itself. And so we've got that MUI input focused. So that's why we needed this exact syntax. We needed a space here because the input itself is a child element of the text field. And then we needed another space because the icon button root is a child of the input. So a little bit complex in that selector. Let's move on to the actual input component that we've got. And so I'm going to use a lot of the same things. Like I'm going to just keep this state value and handle clear click. And we'll just show quickly how to do the exact same thing on the input. So it needs a similar onChange handler and value. So I'll just take those and bring them down. Let me just format that real fast. So once again, we need to use end adornment, but we don't want it inside of our input props because here on the input, we're already at the input level. So I'm just going to directly take that and put it in here. But we'll need to switch up the syntax a little bit. We are, of course, in prop world instead of object world now, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to give it the right equal sign and curly brace syntax, and then we're really good to go, I believe. So one last thing, I will actually add similar styling here. So here, as we showed, the MUI focus class is actually on the input. So I've got that on the root level here. There's no space, so it's at the root level that it's looking for that focused class. But I do still need this space to go deep down and look for this MUI icon button root class. So let's get a color on here, once again, of primary.main, and let's make sure that this all works as expected. Here we go. All right, we've got the styling on there. I clear, and the clear icon disappears, so all good. And of course, whatever happens to our text field is happening to our input and vice versa because we're using the same state value. Let's move on to the autocomplete. The autocomplete component has clear button enabled by default on it, so that's an icon that shows up anytime an option is selected. I click out, the icon disappears, I click back in, it's there again, but I clear it, and even with focus, then the icon is gone. So that's what we're dealing with, and we need to figure out how to customize that as we desire. So I've already got quite a bit of the default code in here, or I say default, the kind of the baseline code. What I'll add is first a little bit of styling for this, for the icon. And so autocomplete, as I've mentioned, it's a compositional component for the render input. That means like the input area where you can type into. Then I am returning a text field. I'm setting that to be a text field. So what that means is if I want to style the icon, then I could actually accomplish it at the SX prop in the autocomplete and just it'd pretty much be the same code, but it's a little bit more precise to put it here. The reason is that the clear icon is a child of the text field. That makes it also a child of the autocomplete root, but it's just, in my opinion, better to have it be more precise by, acknowledging that the clear icon is a child of the text field. So let's get some styling in here. I'm just actually going to add the styling as a const. So let me come up here and I'll do that. I'll make that const up here. The text field was already kind of cluttered, so I think it's better off up here. And you can see that I've already imported my icon that we'll use in a little bit. So anyway, what we need to do is we need to determine what the class is that we'll need to target here. So I am going to look in DevTools, and it's always a little bit difficult, of course, with something that needs focus, but let's see if we can figure it out. So here's our end adornment. So that's probably a pretty good indication. Oh, this one's going to be a tough one. Okay, there, it remembered and it expanded it for me. So here we go. Let's see, do any of these have autocomplete on them already? MUI Autocomplete - clear indicator. You see that class right there where my mouse is? Let's go ahead and target that. There's probably a variety of things that we could target to make this work, but I'm going to target that one. I always have a little bit of trial and error with creating these nested selectors on these more advanced components. So anyway, let's say and .mui button base -root .mui autocomplete -clear indicator, and I'm just making it more precise by including the button base root class. So anyway, running with that, then let us just simply add some color with a value of blue. And there we go. We're already getting what we want. So the next thing that we need to do is, since the autocomplete is enabled by default, then I'll show you first, of course, how to style it like we just did. And next, I will show you how to customize the icon for it. So MUI team has given us some useful props here, one being the clear icon. And I'll just take this highlight off icon. I just picked one from the list, and there's a great sheet in the MUI docs, or a great page in the MUI docs where you can search through all of the icons that they have available. And I actually bookmarked that because I'm always in there. And I probably searched for clear or something like that, and I found this. So let's take a look now. There we go. Simple as that. So pretty cool that they've got that. Another thing that's handy is clear on escape. You can also see clear on blur. If you've never seen syntax like this, where I'm not even setting it to a value, it's just assuming that it's a Boolean, and it's saying clear on escape equals true. It's just a little bit of shorthand for that. So here, if I go in here, you can't see it, but I just pressed the escape button, and it cleared. So pretty neat. One last thing that we can look at is you can actually disable the clear button. And once again, they have a nice prop for it. And hey, look, no clear button. So really, that's all there is with the autocomplete and with clear. And there's an infinite amount of styling that you could do if you wanted to just dig into the styling more, and that would just be looking more at nested selectors in here. Another thing I want to mention is I do actually have full code for this article, the TextField, Input, Autocomplete, and we'll look at the select in a moment. I have links to full code that you can copy paste in the video details. And also I have an MUI course that I released this month being September 2022. And my MUI course just digs deep into styling all these different components. Now let's move on to the select component. The last component that we'll look at is the select component, and it really behaves almost exactly like the text field or the input. And the select component ultimately boils down to an input component as well, so makes sense that it's like that. So anyway, we can use the same end adornment prop, and we will also add some styling in our SX prop here. So with our end adornment here, once again, we're just going to have an icon button, and make sure that's happy there with proper closing tag. So one difference is that I didn't have to use the input props and wrap end adornment in input props and use end adornment as a field inside of input props. So that's pretty much the only difference with the text field. Anyway, so we've got our icon button in here, and we'll say, we'll pass in our clear icon. So I've got that up here. You can see that I've got all the usual default stuff. I've got, in this case, score, and the handle clear click is just set score to an empty string like usual. But the input, the select here has a finite list of options to select from. So anyway, I'm going to pass in my clear right here. And then we need our change handler here, or our click handler on click equals, and we'll just say, of course, handle clear click. And that's really all we need for functionality. So let's take a look at this. There we go. One thing I like to do is I like to make the arrow disappear when there's already a value selected. So this is the select, it's got that arrow, you click it, drop down pops up. If a value has already been selected, then the user is aware that that's how the select works, and also that's when we want our clear icon to be there. So just to have less visual clutter, I'm going to remove the arrow, and the syntax for that in our SX styling prop is to say, and we'll say dot MUI select dash icon outlined, and we'll say display. We're saying display if score, then don't display, and if there's not a score, then the display is normal. Basically, we're saying just do your normal thing if there's no score. So let's take a look at that, see how that plays out, and we see them both right now, and we could declare that a little bit too. So now that a score is selected, then there's no drop-down arrow. So very cool. And one more thing we need is just in keeping with our pattern, then I will say and dot MUI dash focused dot MUI icon button dash root, and we'll say color and the usual primary dot main. So let's make sure that is all appearing as expected. Okay, we've got that focus on, and just like our outline is that primary main color, so is our icon. So that's how I like it. Now the last thing that we need to do is, of course, we need to have the icon button only appear if there is a value that needs to be cleared. So we will say SX equals, and we'll say, we'll use visibility again. And once again, we'll just use our score here. But in this case, we're saying visible or hidden. So let's make sure that that is all working just fine. So clear it. We've got the drop-down arrow. Select a value. We've only got our icon there. So pretty cool.